Introduce you to Nectar Economakis. Did I get it right?
Close.
Close. Okay, I tried. Nectar is a partner in Amiral Ventures, and he's going to tell you what he does. I'll just tell you that he does a lot more than what he does, or what he'll say he does. We met at TechAid, which brings technology companies together to support a charity or charities in Montreal under the Centraide banner. And he's tireless. He just works and does everything, a lot of work there. So I just wanted to put that up, and he's going to tell us, have a great conversation on startups and how they fit into the whole world and what they can do. Good luck.
Thanks, Abel. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Nectar. I have a very complicated Greek name, so I often hear things like nectarine. So if you want to mispronounce my name, I'm very used to it. I'll give brownie points if you find a new way. As Nabil mentioned, I'm a technology investor, and I love startups. That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I find startups are really the most interesting category of company because most of the time it doesn't work, but once in a while there's like this magical thing that happens and ends up working. And then blend this with obviously the world of technology, which you all work in, and you get this very interesting dynamics. And that's what I'm here to unpack a little bit and try and understand, well, how does this thing work? So I'm going to start off maybe with two quick stories. I'm going to start with this first story. We're going to rewind the clock. We're going to go to 2007. So I'm going to ask you all to pretend that you're the CEO of this Canadian company that is having global success. They're selling their products across the world. The press is writing weekly stories about you. Anyone want to take a guess at which company I'm referring to? 2007. RIM? Yes. So BlackBerry. Right? So BlackBerry is this global phenomenon in 2007, having really growth trajectory. Their phones were called the Crackberry at the time, just because they were so addictive. Like athletes were using them. The president of the United States. And then in that summer is where the iPhone launched. And the founder, co-CEO of the company, Mike Lazaridis, saw this and said, "Oh, like we now have to compete with this new category called the iPhone." Out of curiosity, who here owned a BlackBerry, just like back in the day? Okay, it's a good sense of like age group. Okay, this is a trickier question. Who here doesn't know what a pin is in regards to a BlackBerry? Like, you've never heard of what a pin is. Just like one brave soul. So for the people that don't know what a pin is, that was the way you would actually message with people on a BlackBerry device. It's kind of funny when you think about it today. So what happened to BlackBerry, right? So there's like this really interesting story. So let's rewind the clock. Let's go back to 2007, the CEO, Mr. Lazaridis, opens up first iPhone that summer, looks at it, and really the iPhone changed all the rules, right? So they crammed 2 processors in the phone, 700 megabytes of memory. The BlackBerry at the time only had 32 megabytes, 1 processor. The iPhone had a fully compatible web browser. BlackBerry purposefully limited data usage for those people that recall when you're working. It was made on purpose to not crash the wireless networks. So you're thinking, oh wow, it's a much better device. But what do you do in that moment, right? If you're running BlackBerry, so if you look at the numbers, BlackBerry was in a great position, right? So if we look at this is like revenues in the billions. You can see in 2007, the company had $3 billion. Projected to grow to 6 the year after, and then hitting a peak of 19 in 2011, right? So if you're in the leadership chair of BlackBerry, it's like there's no problem. Like numbers are going well, fine. There's a new competitor, but actually it was already too late. That's where iPhone actually dominated, and despite the fact that the company was still on a growth trajectory, they adapted way too late, right? So there's really kind of like interesting story of a company like essentially that was a leader and then being disrupted by another company. And then people think, oh, Apple's so big, but in that time, RIM had like 60 billion market cap. Apple was 120. So very different times. Today, Apple's in the trillions because of the iPhone predominantly. So very interesting story of a company that didn't succeed. So second story, I want to talk to you about today is a local company here in Montreal, another Canadian success story called Hopper. Who here, out of curiosity, has used Hopper or has it on their phone? A few people, yeah. It's geared towards a younger audience. So I want to talk a little bit about this company that is currently on the upswing, doing extremely well. I think a company I really look up to, founded in 2007 by two gentlemen, Fred Lalonde and Just Overkirk, here in Montreal. And if you're not familiar with the company, what they do is that they essentially are a travel app, so allows users to book directly on the app, gives price predictions, allows a lot of different features to give just more control on the user, on their flight, their hotel booking, their car rental, etc. And the company is really on this upward trajectory. But then if you lift the hood to try and understand, well, how they did it, they solved this massive data problem. So picture of a trash can, because what they did was very interesting, right? So they went to all the OTAs in 2007, 2008, and told them, hey, you have all this data of searches, of people looking for flights that you're just throwing away, right? So like OTAs are just focusing on the actual conversion, the booking, right? So you search for something, you book, you get the price, etc. What Hopper did is like, hey, you're throwing all this data, let's sign an agreement, we'll take it off your hands. So literally trillions of rows of data off all these OTAs. And then they analyzed these data over years. So they used just machine learning algorithms to be able to say, hey, like we can now accurately predict when a user should book a flight. So it gave a lot more dynamic control on a user, telling them, hey, this is not the right time because it's too expensive, you should wait a little bit. Very novel when they launched this in 2015. So they were in the lab working from 2007 to 2015, toiling away, building this company, and then they launched in 2015. And they went to market. And from then, it's been just an upward trajectory for this company. So you can see here a little bit of the growth. This is mobile downloads in the tens of millions. It's still a private company, so we don't have exact revenue numbers. But what's interesting is that during the pandemic, you could see obviously it went down, but revenue numbers actually grew. You would say, well, how is that possible? How did revenue grow when it's like illegal to fly in most countries? And the simple reason is that they use this data to build fintech products and develop multiple additional revenue streams, even a separate brand called Hopper Technology Systems, where they sell their fintech products to other OTAs, right? So we get their data, build this B2C platform on mobile, and then essentially build now a fintech arm with obviously much better margins, right? If you're selling fintech, so like price protection, travel insurance to these other OTAs as well. So great success story. I think their last valuation was $5 billion. I've heard rumors it's actually much, much more than that now. So a company to watch out for. And I like these two juxtaposition stories because they speak to this concept of creative destruction, right? This very kind of famous term, like in economics by Joseph Schumpeter of it's a normal life cycle of companies to decline and then other ones to take their place, right? So it's this very kind of like tried and true process that happens in every single industry. And maybe one boring corporate slide that kind of like shows what this means, right? So like startups go through all these phases, right? From like the inception to early growth, high growth, maturity, and then eventual decline. And then of course, every startup's goal is to go to high growth as much as possible. And every big traditional company, well, they just want to stave off decline. And why it's interesting, I think, in today's world to talk about this, this process is because we're going to see this accelerate because of the multiple technologies that are emerging, notably, of course, AI. But we're seeing it in different fields. Like auto OEMs are now entering their decline phase, right? So if you look at companies like Honda, GM, Toyota, brands that have been around for a long time, building cars that are powered by tiny explosions is an old technology. It's going away. It's just obviously a question of years and decades, but these are not the companies of the future, right? The new companies of the future, obviously like Tesla or BYD in China, that are now pushing and being, reinventing entire industries. So that's just one example, but you could think of this across a spectrum of industries. So it's a very interesting process, and at the forefront of this is startups. right? It's the young upstarts that are building these new technologies, these new companies. So how does this work, right? That's, I think, the main gist of what I want to talk about. And that's the key question is, how do startups win, right? It's not a very easy one, and I'm not going to pretend that this is the formula and that you need to follow. I'm just going to share maybe a few observations I've seen from years of like investing and working with startups. And like I said, the odds are always stacked against a small company, right? Like no resources, no money, versus like big companies that are much more powerful. You think the incumbents are able to, like crush the smaller ones, and most of the time that's what happens actually. But once in a while there's a breakthrough and a startup wins. So I'm going to give you a bit of a sense as like how, I think some of the reasons this tends to occur, but it's not a perfect formula. The first one is an important one. I think it's the initial point is breaking a pattern. So finding an inflection point, finding an insight into a market that is brand new and really seizing upon this insight, right? So entrepreneurs, founders that start companies, they live in the future, so they think of something that hasn't happened quite yet. So it's not an incremental innovation. It's a completely new way of thinking. And a few examples of companies. First one, Shopify, obviously well-known Canadian success story, founded in 2006, and their premise was we're going to build e-commerce software for small merchants, for small companies. And at that time, it was highly ridiculed, like even amongst the most sophisticated investors, like, well, such a small market, e-commerce, independent shops, that's not really a big category. But obviously, when you looked at the trend of where it was going, obviously it was a great investment if you invested back then. And today, Shopify is the largest Canadian technology company by quite a bit. Second is a company called Nubo, a little bit less well known. It was founded by my partner Fred in 2012, and they built AI algorithms for HVAC systems. So essentially for industrial machines. So they were selling to big companies like in Japan, for instance. And they founded it in 2012. So you think of like, hey, we're going to help HVAC systems save energy, like use predictive maintenance. Back then, very novel idea that obviously had quite a bit of success. And last one, Lion Electric, another Canadian company based here in Quebec, where they founded in 2008. We're going to build EVs, but for trucks and school buses. When in 2008 you can think, hey, that's not necessarily certain that we're going to transition school buses and EVs, and it's still not exactly done quite yet. So again, identifying these key patterns and obviously seizing upon them. The next, so once you've identified this pattern, this inflection point, oftentimes these startups seize upon exponential trends. So the image here is the first computer from IBM in 1955. It weighed a ton, and its memory was 5 megabytes. I see some of you, like on your phones or email, you're probably sending attachments that are bigger than 5 megabytes, right? So like today, if you think about like a megabyte is literally nothing. It used to be something that needed to be loaded up on a truck by like a group of burly men. So exponential trend is simply just a doubling over a certain amount of time, and seizing upon obviously this trend is what startups tend to do. I'll just give you a very simple classic example of how our brains don't understand exponential trends. So take a chessboard, take a grain of rice on the chessboard, and simply double the grain of rice on every square and fill up the entire board, right? Okay, so that's 2 exponent 64. If you take out a calculator, that's like 15 quintillion as an answer, right? But if you look at a chessboard, it doesn't look that impressive. But over time, the numbers can get very, very large. So that's what you see in computing. So the cost of computing has gone down by an order of magnitude. We see it now with the supercomputers we have in our pockets that are more powerful than than the computer that sent the first people to Mars. To the moon. Mars is coming up, but first people to the moon in the 60s. So you see these exponential trends is what startups tend to seize upon. And we're seeing this not just in computing, we're seeing this today in solar, in energy, in biology. A lot of these exponential trends are occurring, and that's where these new companies are formed because they ride the wave of these background trends. Another important component of how startups win, I would say it's necessary but not sufficient, is how they radically remove friction in the process, right? So let's say we'll take the example of Uber, for instance, right? That launched like now a little bit more than 15 years ago. But why is Uber better than your traditional taxi company? Is that, well, you don't have to, you don't have to wave in the street. It comes to you. You don't have to take out your credit card. There's a level of trust with a person. You can rate the driver. So again, radically removing friction, but also capitalizing on new technology. In this case, it was the iPhone and the GPS that was available in the iPhone. You can think about this, for instance, with just a simple thing like Google search, right? Like, why do people use Google? It's because it's just very simple. It removes a lot of friction. So that's, I think, a key category of how startups end up winning, is that there's this radical focus on just making things much more simple. We could see these things too in enterprise software, right? Like, think of like, let's say, communication with Slack, right? So if you use Slack, very easy to communicate, versus, let's say, Teams, which in my view is like horrible user experience. So apologies to all the people that use Teams, because I don't think it's a great product. But I bring it up specifically because, to my point, it's necessary but not sufficient. Why does Microsoft still dominate, even though Teams, no offense, is a much shittier product? Well, distribution counts, right? So it's important to remove friction, but you won't win only with simply a better user experience. But it ends up being a big reason a lot of the time. Then if you lift the hood, another important kind of like these conditions for startups to win is just how they operate. Obviously smaller companies, very flat hierarchies, but they tend to have different command and control structures than your classic, big top-down companies, right? So very flat, very metric-driven, very accountability-focused, and also just this notion of velocity and like releasing products on a regular basis. So it's hard to quantify exactly how do you distill like an operating system for a startup. There's a lot of different variables. I'll just give one example that they tend to be good at because they have no choice, is this notion of failure. They tend to try a lot and fail and then learn from those failures. And I'll give one example, not necessarily of a startup, but one of a company trying to do something and failing. Who here has heard of the Fire Phone? Okay, a few hands, okay, interesting. So Fire Phone, people that don't know, it was a phone launched by Amazon in 2016, if I believe. And Amazon's goal was, hey, we want to compete with iOS and Android that are dominating the smartphone market. The CEO Bezos at the time was like, it's unacceptable that we, Apple and Google are in our consumers' pockets. We have to build something that's going to compete with them. So they invested hundreds of millions of dollars. Big product launch on the stage, Fire Phone, we're going to build a better phone. And within 18 months, the whole project was shuttered. They sold almost no phones. So it was going back to timing, it was just too late. Apple and Google were dominating that market. So very big public failure. I think they wasted something like $500 million. But today, no one really remembers, right? So I think that's one thing that startups tend to do, and in this case, I'd give it to Amazon, it's obviously a much bigger company, is tolerance for risk, tolerance for failure. And I think that's one thing sometimes that's missing in big companies is like going after, taking some risk, even if it doesn't work out. And a little bit like an investor in startups where you invest in 10 companies and 2 or 3 only make it, that kind of mentality is not a bad thing sometimes for big companies. Like, hey, we'll invest in an area, and if it doesn't work out, that's okay. But if there's a return, it's often a 10x or 100x return. And I think that's what startups obviously try to do, right? They'll try a bunch of different things, experiment, fail, the fail fast mentality. And I think that's a key part of their success. Maybe 2 quick final points is, and this is an important one, I think the last 2 are the most important, I think, are this notion of orthogonal competition, right? So like if a startup competes, they're not trying to compete on a level playing field. They're really trying to attack the business model of the incumbent from a completely different angle, right? So often here you'll hear things like disruptive innovation, the classic Clayton Christensen example of trying to build a lower end product and moving more in the high end. You hear about things like network effects. So using a lot of data from different sources to be able to compete and aggregate that data. We saw this in the advertising market, right, with like Google and Facebook, where they completely dominate today advertising, not just digital but total advertising, because they're just competing with a completely different approach, right? So like aggregating all this consumer data, offering a self-serve interface for businesses to essentially target those consumers. Very different than if anyone's worked in media, GRPs. If you remember GRPs, like reach time frequency, we want to target women 25 to 35. That's obviously the old way of doing things, right? So like completely attacking the incumbent in a different plane, which ends up really being a huge disadvantage, very hard to compete against. And I'd say the last one is being mission-driven. Having this notion of the rebels against the big evil empire, right? So like the 1984 Apple ad of, we're gonna crush Big Brother. And oftentimes having this big aspiring mission, what it does is that it attracts a lot of talented people that wanna join and be part of a mission, something that's bigger than them. So you get a high talent density in these startups of people that want to go after something new and build something important, right? Like there are no oil and gas startups today, right? Like no one's like, hey, let's start an oil and gas company, right? There's a ton of sustainable energy startups that are trying to reinvent that industry. So this is the case. You could think of like, yes, the bland corporate mission statements, but oftentimes they're very authentic and credible, right? We think of like Google's classic mission statement of organizing the world's information, right? Or SpaceX, the rocket company that says, hey, we want to put people on Mars. Those are very memorable. And when you look at some other big companies, like mission statements, like what's Bell Canada's mission statement? It was actually on their website today. I was looking at it. It's like, as Canada's largest communications company, we strive to create better customer experiences and make a positive difference for Canadians. That's pretty boring. It's like no one's going to remember this walking out of this room, right? So that's, I think, the goal of these mission statements or thinking big is that it's a very specific goal we're trying to achieve, right? Not just this bland corporate gobbledygook. So I think that's kind of the core reason. And yes, so startups do often compete with incumbents, but one of the things I want to obviously impress upon you today is that you should also be working with them, right? If you're not already in a startup, I think working with a startup has a lot of benefits. And I think particularly in terms of like learning about innovation, faster go-to-market, and being able to steal some of that entrepreneurial energy into your own company as well. And I think it's a bit of a priority in Canada as well. The Bank of Canada said that Canadian companies have to work more with technology startups. It's not just me saying it, was like Bank of Canada. So hopefully I'll give you a few reasons in the next few slides why you should consider working with startups. The first one is access to cutting-edge innovation. There's a company we invested in this year called Maxa. They're building this platform, this AI platform for CFOs, essentially aggregating a bunch of ERP data and being able to generate business insights much, much faster. So you get access to cutting-edge innovation versus trying to build it in-house. So I think that's one very good reason. Second is this being able sometimes to have a faster go-to-market. So Alaya Care, another local startup, a little bit bigger than Maxa. They're like, I think, 500-600 employees based here in Montreal. They provide home care software. And TELUS Health partnered with them, signed a reseller agreement to be able to sell Alaya Care's products to all of TELUS Health's customers. So obviously a great benefit for Alaya Care, but also for TELUS to be able to have this innovative new software that they're able to sell and really accelerate the go-to-market in a segment that was untapped for them. So again, a good partnership can often lead also to acquisitions down the line, right? So if you're more on the buy side of the equation, well, working with startups can give you a sense of like, hey, maybe there's a few that will be down in the M&A pipeline in the future as well. And maybe last but not least is being protected from disruption, right? So there is importance to doing a bit of R&D. You spoke about tolerating failure to a certain extent. So hiring startups for their merit, not because of some grant that the government gave, but like really hiring them and putting them to the test. This is a Canadian company called Cohere, based in Toronto, very similar to what OpenAI does. And one of the co-founders, Aiden, the middle gentleman in the picture, was actually one of the authors of the research paper that came out of Google in 2017 that spawned the whole LLM/generative AI revolution. So obviously one of the key people in that space. And right now they're selling really just enterprise, trying to help Canadian companies and companies across the world really integrate this whole new world of generative AI into their business. So I think it could be a cool way also, you hire these new startups to think about the future, try and experiment, and try and see how these new technologies can be integrated into the core business model. And a key point about hiring startups is that you need to have this person on board. This is the hippo. This is the highest paid person opinion in your company, right? So if you're doing some kind of like transformation project or you want to do some kind of interesting innovation lab, you need to have this person on board, right? So like the CEO or the board need to be on board. I've seen it too many times. They're like, hey, we're going to do this big digital transformation. If this person, if it's not reporting up to them, if they don't care about it, it's not going to go anywhere. I think that's really kind of the key thing that needs to happen is really having buy-in from the top to be able to let the runway happen for the startup, for that experimentation. So I'll finish off with a few ideas. This is a big data conference after all, so I want to throw a few ideas as to stuff I've been thinking about. I think that are great opportunities for startups, but also for big companies in terms of all these AI trends specifically. So I spoke about that research paper that Aiden co-wrote. The title of it was "Attention is All You Need" in 2017. And I think the key piece, like obviously this is the image from her, is what's happened today is that we've passed the Turing test. We now believe that computers are on the same level in terms of us, our understanding of them as humans, right? So we think that we're speaking to a human, essentially. So there are not necessarily any new major breakthroughs that need to happen in the world of AI. We are already past that big window, basically, of that Turing test. So this is going to unlock a lot of different opportunities. I'm going to share with you a few ideas, but don't hold my feet to the fire. What's that expression? Predictions are very difficult, especially about the future. So the first thing I think about a lot is this notion of repetitive work and how task automation is going to be something of the past. So I spoke about Maxa before, the company we invested in. They're essentially automating the team of, like the work of FP&A teams that spend weeks gathering ERP data from a bunch of different silos. So if you're doing something that's repetitive, a machine is going to do it, right? So you can think about these tasks that are being done in your organization. They're most likely going to move to discrete workloads into the cloud. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there when you're looking at all the different workflows inside your organizations. Next up, and it's one that we can't shy away from, is cost reduction and how a lot of people are going to be impacted by this. I'll give you one example. This Swedish fintech company called Klarna. They're a buy now, pay later company. And they publicly came out a few months ago and said, we used AI to essentially automate our call center operations, replacing the work of 700 people. And they took their call waiting times from their call times from 11 minutes to 2 minutes, and added $40 million in profits to their bottom line. So you can think of, well, a call center is going to be a natural place where this type of reduction is going to happen. Right? Like think of training a model on all the transcripts, all the the database of information within a company, and then just having is interactive agent. This has already happened essentially. So again, this is just going to accelerate over the next few years. So a lot of companies are going to use this to try and reduce costs within their P&L. I think a lot about like war and strife and how we're essentially deglobalizing slowly but surely. So like sending a product from Asia to Canada for us to purchase is going to become something of a relic, I think, over the next few decades. So there's going to be a lot more onshoring, and this is going to be done with robotics, with AI, fully automated factories. that are going to be cheaper to be done here than having, like foreign labor doing it for us. So I think this is another key trend. I think when it comes to AI, we're going to see a lot more of these resilient hubs, resilient manufacturing hubs bubble up. So I think it's interesting for companies to start looking about this when they're doing their strategic planning. Hey, how do we have a little bit more resilience in our supply chains? Last, no, I don't think the machines are taking over, but I do think about agents, right? So it's the example of Agent Smith, but you might have heard of the term agent when it comes to AI. So there's going to be a lot more of these autonomous systems that are going to be coming out. They're already in deployment today, right? So does anyone own a Tesla out of curiosity? Just one person? Okay. It's a good car. You should try it. They have their full self-driving, which essentially, I want to go from point A to point B, and that will essentially take you there. So that's an example of an agent, but we're going to see many more examples of this type of autonomous systems. I think that's it. I'll leave you with one last quick story. It's the story of Roger Bannister. This gentleman that in 1953 broke the 4-minute mile. So what was interesting at that time, scientists would say that it's impossible for people to run faster, to do a mile under 4 minutes. It's like there's a physical barrier. And then one afternoon in Oxford, England, this gentleman broke it, 3 minutes and 58, right? What's interesting in the story, does anyone know what happened after the interesting part of the story? Yes. And then within the next, yes, that is true. And in the next 18 months, another 16 people did it, right? So what happened is this day where up until like the whole history, weren't able to do it, and then all of a sudden it happened, people were able to do it repeatedly, is that he just demonstrated that, hey, this is like this mythical barrier, right? So I think that's really what's happening today in the world of AI and technology, is that what we used to think was impossible is not really the case. So I think with that, I'm going to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nectar. This was very informative. We will skip the questions right now. If you want to talk to him or ask him questions, he's going to be around, I assume. So